My name is Charmaine, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward, smirking. "You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders, but inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary and prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight as joined honor societies and pushed myself to the absolute limit just to feel seen. That lifelong habit of pushing myself until I broke is exactly what landed me in a sterile hospital room at Atlanta Medical Center just 5 days after that disastrous brunch. My body finally gave out. It started as a sharp ache in my side during a client meeting and escalated into blinding agony that left me curled on my office floor. The diagnosis was a ruptured appendix with severe complications. I had to be rushed into emergency surgery. The doctors told me later that if I had waited another hour, the infection would have turned septic and I would not have made it. Waking up from the anesthesia was a nightmare of its own. My mouth tasted like bitter chemicals and old pennies. Every time I drew a breath, a sharp, searing pain sliced through my lower abdomen, reminding me of the staples holding my skin together. The heavy hospital blanket felt like lead against my legs. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. I slowly blinked my eyes open, adjusting to the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights overhead. I turned my head to the right, fully expecting to see my husband Darnell sitting in the uncomfortable vinyl visitor chair. I expected him to be asleep, or maybe scrolling through his phone, but present. We had been married for 5 years, and despite our recent arguments, a hospital room was where a spouse was supposed to be. But the chair was empty. There was no jacket draped over the back. There was no half-empty cup of bad cafeteria coffee on the side table. There was absolutely nothing to indicate that my husband had even stepped foot in this room. A cold wave of realization washed over me, chilling me far worse than the air conditioning blowing from the ceiling vent. I shifted my weight, biting down hard on my lower lip to keep from screaming as the pain flared in my stomach. I reached over to the plastic tray table and grabbed my phone. The screen lit up momentarily, blinding me. I squinted at the notifications. Nothing. Not a single text message. Not a missed call. Not a single digital footprint from the man who had promised to love and protect me in sickness and in health. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the phone and opened my recent calls log. I had called him right before the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance. He had told me he was grabbing his car keys and would follow right behind the flashing lights. That was 2 days ago. I had been unconscious for 2 entire days. I clicked his name and pressed the call button. The line rang twice before clicking straight to his customized professional voicemail. I hung up and dialed again. I repeated this process over and over. I called him 22 times. Each time I was met with the same automated greeting. Darnell was actively ignoring my calls. Before I could spiral into a complete panic, the heavy wooden door to my room swung open. A nurse walked in holding a digital tablet. She did not offer a warm smile or a comforting word. She moved with the rigid efficiency of someone who was completely burnt out. She adjusted the fluid dripping from my IV bag and finally looked down at me. "Miss Charmaine, I see you are finally awake," she said, her voice flat and unbothered. "The doctor will be in shortly to check your incisions. In the meantime, I need to discuss your discharge paperwork." I nodded weakly, my throat incredibly dry. "I just want to go home," I whispered. "Well, that is going to be a slight problem," the nurse replied, crossing her arms over her faded blue scrubs. "We require a next of kin or an authorized medical guardian to sign your discharge papers and assume liability for your post-operative care. Furthermore, our billing department flagged an issue with your account this morning." I frowned, confusion cutting through the haze of the pain medications. "What issue? I have premium health insurance. I pay for the highest tier available." The nurse sighed and looked at her tablet. "Your insurance provider declined the coverage due to a payment failure. The premium has not been paid in 2 months, and the policy has been suspended. Therefore, you are currently listed as a self-pay patient, and we need a credit card on file before we can process your release." My heart began to pound against my ribs. A payment failure. That was impossible. I am a software developer who handles large-scale financial systems for corporate clients. I am meticulous about my personal finances. I have every single recurring bill set to auto-pay from the joint checking account I share with Darnell. We always had plenty of money in that account. My mind immediately flashed back to a heated argument Darnell and I had just 3 weeks prior. It was an argument we had been having on a loop for the past 2 years. Beyond my salary in the tech industry, I had inherited a highly lucrative piece of commercial real estate in a rapidly gentrifying area of downtown Atlanta. My grandfather, Theodore, a brilliant self-made man, had left the building entirely in my name. He saw my business acumen and trusted me to protect the family legacy. Darnell absolutely hated that fact. Darnell worked as a finance broker. He was obsessed with the image of wealth and success. He wore tailored Italian suits, drove a leased luxury sports car, and insisted on picking up the tab for his friends whenever we went to expensive steakhouses. He constantly pressured me to leverage my grandfather's building. He wanted me to take out a massive loan against the property so he could invest in a flashy startup venture with his fraternity brothers. I always refused. I told him the building was a sacred family asset, not a casino chip for him to gamble with. My refusal deeply wounded his ego. He accused me of emasculating him, of not trusting his financial expertise, and of failing to submit to his leadership as the man of the house. He resented my financial independence because it meant he could never control me. Now lying in this sterile hospital bed, staring at the blank face of the nurse, the pieces began to click together in a horrifying sequence. The empty chair, the 22 ignored phone calls, the lapsed medical insurance. "Just a moment, please," I told the nurse, my voice suddenly sounding much stronger than I felt. "Let me check my banking app. There must be a glitch with the autopay system." I opened the banking application on my phone. My hands were no longer trembling. They were perfectly still, frozen by a terrifying surge of adrenaline. I typed in my password and waited for the dashboard to load. This was the joint account where I deposited my entire quarterly bonus just last week. There should have been over $80,000 sitting safely in the available balance, enough to cover any medical emergency 10 times over. The blue loading circles spun on the screen for what felt like an eternity. I held my breath, gripping the plastic casing of the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My eyes darted to the top corner of the screen as the numbers finally populated. I blinked, thinking the strong painkillers were making me hallucinate. I closed the app and opened it again. I refreshed the screen. The numbers remained exactly the same. The glowing red font stared back at me, mocking my trust, mocking my vows, and mocking the entire life I had built with the man I married. Available balance, -$400. The nurse tapped her pen against the side of her tablet. "Is there a problem with the card, Miss Charmaine?" she asked. I slowly lowered the phone to my chest. The physical pain radiating from my surgical wounds suddenly felt entirely insignificant compared to the massive betrayal detonating inside my chest. My husband had not just abandoned me in the emergency room to die alone. He had actively orchestrated my ruin while I was lying unconscious on an operating table. I stared at the negative balance again, letting the reality burn into my brain. Every deposit I had made from my late-night coding sessions, every dollar I had saved from sacrificing vacations, every penny of the bonus I earned by missing dinners and working weekends, gone. Wiped clean. I clicked on the transaction history. There it was. A massive wire transfer initiated 24 hours ago, sent directly to a private offshore holding company that I did not recognize. But I recognized the authorization signature line attached to the digital receipt. It was Darnell. He had drained our entire life savings while the surgeons were literally cutting into my stomach. The audacity of his betrayal was almost impressive. He knew my insurance was tied to the joint account. He knew that draining it would cause the autopay to bounce. He knew that the hospital would refuse my coverage. He wanted me trapped here. He needed me incapacitated, stuck in a bureaucratic nightmare with the hospital billing department, unable to leave this bed and unable to access my own assets. Why, what was he buying himself time to do? My eyes widened as a horrifying thought struck me. The commercial building. The real estate my grandfather left me. Darnell had been begging me to sign over partial management rights for months, claiming it would help with our tax bracket. 2 months ago, exhausted from a massive software launch at work, I finally signed a stack of documents he shoved in front of me while I was drinking my morning coffee. He said they were just standard tax filings. But what if they were not? What if he had slipped a medical power of attorney into that stack? If I was deemed medically incapacitated or stuck in a hospital, unable to manage my affairs, a medical power of attorney would give him full legal authority to make decisions on my behalf. Not just medical decisions, financial ones, real estate ones. He could leverage the building. He could sell it. I looked up at the ceiling, the pieces of his puzzle finally forming a complete, devastating picture. My husband was not missing because he was scared of hospitals. My husband was missing because he was currently liquidating my entire life. I looked back at the nurse who was still waiting impatiently by the door. "Can you please bring me my clothes?" I asked. The ones I was wearing when the ambulance brought me in. The nurse frowned. "You cannot leave. You have fresh surgical staples and you have not been officially discharged. If you leave now, it will be against medical advice, and you will be completely liable for any complications." I swung my legs over the side of the hospital bed. A white, hot agony shot through my core, but I forced my feet to plant firmly on the cold linoleum floor. I grabbed the metal IV pole to steady myself, looking the nurse dead in the eye. "Bring me my clothes!" I repeated my tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "I am leaving this hospital right now. And trust me, medical complications are the least of my husband's worries today." The nurse stared at me in stunned silence for a long second, before turning on her heel and storming out of the room. I reached into the narrow closet next to my bed and pulled out the bag containing the clothes I was wearing when I collapsed in my office. A pair of black slacks, a silk blouse stained with dried blood, and my blazer. Every movement required to dress myself was a masterclass in pain management. Slipping the slacks over my legs felt like lifting heavy boulders. I had to grip the edge of the mattress, squeezing my eyes shut and taking short, shallow breaths until the dizziness passed. I grabbed my phone again. My hands were steady, operating on pure adrenaline and survival instinct. If Darnell was not answering his phone and was not sitting at his office desk, I needed to know exactly where he was hiding while he drained my bank accounts. I opened the device tracker application we had installed on our phones 2 years ago. We originally downloaded the software after a string of carjackings in our neighborhood, promising to only use the tracking feature in real emergencies. This situation definitely qualified as an emergency. The digital map loaded quickly. A small blue dot representing my phone pulsed inside the medical center. A second later, a bright red dot appeared representing Darnell. I zoomed in on the map, expecting to see his location pinned near our bank branch or a lawyer office downtown. Instead, the red dot was resting squarely on the affluent corner of Peachtree and 14th Street. I stared at the address, my brow furrowing in confusion. That was not a bank or an office building. That was the exact physical location of Le Petit Chateau. It was arguably the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive Michelin-starred restaurant in all of Atlanta. It was the kind of elite establishment where getting a reservation required personally knowing the owner or waiting 6 months. The tasting menu started at $500 per person. While I was lying on a hospital bed fighting off a potentially fatal abdominal infection and dealing with a negative checking account balance. My husband was apparently enjoying fine dining. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the absurdity. Was he meeting a wealthy property buyer there? Was he prematurely celebrating a victory? A sickening intuition washed over me. Whenever Darnell wanted to show off, he never did it alone. He needed an admiring audience. And his absolute favorite audience was the one person who constantly validated his worst toxic personality traits, his younger sister Shanice. I minimized the tracking application and opened Instagram. I did not even have to search for her profile. Shanice was always at the top of my daily feed because she posted her entire waking life online, desperate to project a false image of massive generational wealth that she absolutely did not possess. I tapped on the glowing purple ring around her profile picture to view her latest stories. The video buffered for a fraction of a second before blaring loud instrumental hip-hop music through my phone speaker. The camera lens panned slowly across a dimly lit, opulent dining room, featuring massive crystal chandeliers and plush velvet booths. Then the camera flipped around to show Shanice herself. She was practically dripping in designer logos, wearing a head-to-toe patterned Fendi ensemble that I knew for a certainty she could not afford on her dental receptionist salary. She held up a tall crystal champagne flute, her heavily jeweled nails tapping sharply against the glass. The camera shifted slightly to the left, and there he was, Darnell. He was wearing his custom-tailored dark navy Tom Ford suit, laughing loudly and raising his own champagne glass directly to the camera lens. He looked incredibly relaxed. He looked exceptionally wealthy. He looked completely unbothered by the grim reality that his wife was supposed to be suffering in a hospital bed just a few miles away. I paused the video playback, my thumb hovering aggressively over the screen. Overlaid in bold, flashing, glittery text right across the bottom of the video was a caption that made the blood in my veins run completely cold. It read, "Celebrating my brother's new $5 million real estate takeover, #boss moves, #generational wealth." The sheer disrespect of the video hit me much harder than the physical betrayal of the stolen money. $5 million. That was the exact current market appraisal of my grandfather's commercial building downtown. They were sitting inside a Michelin-starred restaurant, happily spending the money they had just fraudulently stolen from my checking account to publicly celebrate the hostile theft of my family legacy. And Shanice had the nerve to casually call it a takeover. I stared at her smiling, arrogant face on the frozen screen, feeling a deep, ancient resentment bubbling violently to the surface of my consciousness. Shanice had always been deeply jealous of me. From the very first day, Darnell proudly brought me home to meet his tight-knit family. She made it her dedicated personal mission to subtly undermine my presence in their lives. In her eyes and in the overly protective eyes of their mother, Darnell was the flawless golden child who inherently deserved the entire world handed to him on a silver platter without doing any actual hard work. At every single Sunday family dinner, while we passed around heavy plates of baked macaroni and cheese and seasoned collard greens, Shanice would deliberately find a way to take subtle, venomous jabs at my successful career. She would smile sweetly across the long dining table and say things like, "I just do not understand how you can willingly work so many grueling hours, Charmaine. A real traditional man wants a wife who is consistently home to take good care of him, not a tired woman who acts like she is his corporate boss." Or she would loudly complain to the older aunts that my intense professional ambition was actively emasculating her brother, heavily suggesting that my independent financial success was somehow a direct personal insult to his fragile manhood. She constantly weaponized our cultural community expectations of unwavering family loyalty and rigid gender roles, using them as a heavy club to verbally beat me down whenever she felt insecure about her own lack of life direction. And Darnell never once defended me against her attacks. He would just chuckle awkwardly into his napkin and tell me to let it go falsely, claiming it was just how his family showed tough love. I realized clearly right now that it was never love. It was a calculated, deeply shared family resentment. They consistently viewed my hard-earned success not as a marital partnership to be respected, but strictly as a financial resource to be ruthlessly exploited and eventually conquered. I unpaused the video and forced myself to watch it loop 3 more times. The loud sound of their laughter echoed endlessly in the sterile hospital room, mocking everything I had willingly sacrificed for our marriage. I had generously paid off his massive student loan debts. I had fully financed the down payment on his luxury sports car because his personal credit score was completely ruined long before we officially met. I had given him unrestricted access to my financial resources because I genuinely believed we were equal partners, building a stable life together. But to Darnell and Shanice, I was never considered real family. I was just the bank. And now they believed the bank had been permanently liquidated. I gripped the phone so hard the metal edges dug painfully into my palm. I desperately needed to move. I needed to get out of this hospital before the security guards arrived and confined me back into the bed. I quickly grabbed my leather purse from the small plastic bedside table, frantically checking inside to make absolutely sure my house keys and driver identification were safely inside the front pocket. As I slung the heavy purse over my aching shoulder, ignoring the fresh stab of pain, the phone in my hand vibrated sharply against my fingers. A large banner notification dropped down instantly from the top edge of the screen. It was an automated email from the secure online portal of the property management firm that actively oversaw my grandfather's downtown commercial building. I tapped the notification, holding my breath. The email application opened instantly, displaying a short message marked with high-importance priority flags. The direct sender was the chief legal compliance officer at the firm. I read the short subject line once. Then I read it again, my heart stopping entirely in my chest as the severe reality set in. The bold black text stood out menacingly against the stark white background of the screen, confirming my absolute worst possible financial nightmare. The digital message read, "Confirmation. Transfer of deed ownership for the Atlanta commercial building initialized by Darnell Hayes." I stared at the word initialized, the stark reality of the letters burning into my retinas. Initialized did not mean finalized. It meant the legal machinery was in motion, but the final ink might not be dry. I had a closing window of time, perhaps only hours, to stop the complete theft of my family legacy. But the immediate question was how Darnell managed to authorize the transfer of a deed that was exclusively in my name. The answer hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was the thick stack of annual tax documents he had urgently pushed across the kitchen island 2 months ago. I had been running late for a massive software deployment meeting, my mind preoccupied with coding errors and client demands. He had pointed to the yellow sticky tabs, assuring me they were standard joint filing declarations. I trusted my husband. I signed exactly where he told me to sign. But buried somewhere in that dense legal paperwork, he had maliciously slipped in a medical power of attorney clause. By definition, a medical power of attorney granted him absolute authority to make all financial and legal decisions on my behalf, but only if I was deemed physically or mentally incapacitated. Suddenly, his agonizing absence from the hospital made perfect, terrifying sense. Darnell did not stay away because he was a coward or because he could not handle the sight of blood. He stayed away because his entire fraudulent scheme depended entirely on my isolation. If he had been sitting by my bedside advocating for my care and speaking with my surgeons, the hospital administration would have recorded my steady recovery. By actively ignoring the hospital calls and letting my insurance lapse, he forced the medical staff to classify me as an unresponsive patient without an available guardian. He manufactured my incapacitation. He weaponized my ruptured appendix to legally declare me unfit, effectively stealing my voice so he could steal my property. My furious realization was abruptly interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps and loud voices echoing down the hospital corridor. I recognized the sharp, impatient tone of the nurse who had just left my room. She was talking to someone else, explicitly mentioning a difficult patient who was threatening to leave against medical advice. I knew she was returning with hospital security. The administration would never simply let me walk out the front doors without an authorized guardian signing the liability waivers and securing a wheelchair. They would physically restrain me to the bed if necessary, citing patient safety protocols. I did not have the time or the physical strength to fight a legal battle with hospital bureaucrats. I had to disappear immediately. I looked down at the thick plastic IV tube still deeply embedded in the back of my left hand, delivering a steady drip of saline and painkillers into my veins. There was no time to search for a nurse to remove it properly. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the inevitable agony. I reached over with my right hand and peeled back the layers of clear medical tape securing the needle. The adhesive pulled painfully at my skin, but I did not stop. Once the plastic hub was exposed, I pinched it tightly between my thumb and index finger. I closed my eyes, gritted my teeth, and ripped the needle out in one swift, violent motion. A sharp, burning sting flared across my knuckles instantly, followed by a thick bead of dark red blood welling up from the puncture wound. The warm fluid quickly dripped down my fingers and splashed onto the white linoleum floor. I grabbed a rough paper towel from the bedside dispenser, pressing it hard against my bleeding hand to stem the flow. The physical pain was intense, but it was entirely secondary to the massive adrenaline surge flooding my entire nervous system. I grabbed the gray fleece sweatpants I had brought to the hospital, the ones speckled with dried blood from the night the ambulance arrived. I could not risk taking off the hospital gown entirely, as the effort of raising my arms would likely tear my fresh surgical staples open. Instead, I pulled the heavy sweatpants directly up over my bare legs, shoving the thin cotton fabric of the gown inside the waistband. I threw my dark tailored blazer over my shoulders to hide the open back of the gown. I grabbed my purse and cautiously cracked open the heavy wooden door of my room. The hallway was a flurry of activity. Doctors in white coats and nurses pushing heavy medication carts moved quickly past my door, entirely focused on their immediate tasks. I peered down the corridor and saw my nurse pointing aggressively toward my room, followed closely by two large security guards in dark blue uniforms. They were about 40 feet away, distracted by a loud alarm ringing from an adjacent ward. I slipped out of my room and turned firmly in the opposite direction, keeping my head down and my face completely hidden by the collar of my blazer. I pressed my right hand tightly against my freshly stitched abdomen, trying to physically hold my sliced muscles together with every single step I took. I bypassed the brightly lit main elevators, knowing the nurse would easily spot me waiting there. Instead, I pushed through a set of heavy double doors marked explicitly for authorized medical personnel only. The harsh fluorescent lights gave way to a dim concrete hallway, lined with massive laundry bins and stacked medical supply boxes. This was the service corridor. I limped heavily toward the large freight elevator at the end of the hall. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, every inhalation feeling like a serrated knife dragging across my stomach. I hit the call button, praying no maintenance workers were currently using the lift. The heavy metal doors slid open immediately. I stepped inside the massive steel box and hit the button for the basement loading dock. As the elevator descended with a loud mechanical grinding noise, I leaned heavily against the cold metal wall, my knees trembling violently under my own weight. I pulled out my phone and quickly opened a ride-sharing application. I dropped the pickup pin at the rear delivery entrance of the medical center, hoping to completely bypass the main lobby, where security might be actively searching for a fleeing patient. The app indicated a black sedan was only 2 minutes away. I stumbled out of the elevator into the humid underground loading dock, the smell of exhaust fumes and hot garbage making my nauseous stomach churn aggressively. I hid behind a large commercial dumpster until I saw the black sedan slowly pull into the alleyway. I rushed toward the vehicle, throwing open the back door and collapsing awkwardly onto the leather seat. The driver, an older gentleman with silver hair, turned around with a look of deep concern. He took one look at my pale, sweating face, my blood-stained sweatpants, and the hospital gown visibly peeking out from underneath my blazer. He opened his mouth to ask if I needed to be driven to an emergency room. I cut him off before he could form the actual question. I gave him my home address in the affluent Buckhead neighborhood and told him I would tip him $100 in cash if he drove as fast as legally possible without asking me any questions. He nodded silently, locked the doors, and accelerated smoothly out of the dark alleyway. The ride through the busy streets of Atlanta was an absolute nightmare of physical torture. The city infrastructure was notorious for its uneven pavement and massive potholes. Every single time the sedan hit a bump, a jarring shockwave of pure agony ripped straight through my abdominal wall. I clutched my stomach with both hands, curling into a tight fetal position on the back seat, biting down so hard on my lower lip that I tasted fresh copper blood. The physical pain was blinding, but the emotional clarity I experienced in that back seat was razor sharp. I thought about the culture of my in-laws, the toxic entitlement that Shanice proudly displayed on her social media, and the quiet arrogance Darnell possessed. They genuinely believed that because I was a woman who made my own money, I somehow owed them my resources to validate his masculinity. Darnell had always felt small standing next to my achievements. Instead of stepping up to build his own legitimate legacy, he decided the easiest path to greatness was simply stealing mine. He needed to be the big man at the expensive restaurant, buying champagne for wealthy investors, proving to the world that he was a powerful real estate mogul. He was willing to let his own wife die alone in a hospital room just to secure the down payment on his pathetic ego. Every time the car swerved around tight corners, my resolve hardened into solid ice. I was not just going to stop the sale of the building, I was going to systematically dismantle his entire life. I was going to take away the expensive suits, the luxury cars, and the unearned respect he commanded from his greedy family. The black sedan finally turned off the busy main road and glided smoothly into the quiet tree-lined streets of my upscale neighborhood. The manicured lawns and massive brick houses stood in stark contrast to the chaotic violence raging inside my mind. We pulled up to the curb directly in front of my luxury three-story townhouse. I transferred the promised $100 tip to the driver through the application, thanked him quietly, and slowly pushed myself out of the vehicle. The afternoon sun beat down heavily on my shoulders as I dragged my feet up the long concrete walkway. The towering oak trees cast long dark shadows across the pristine front porch. My home looked exactly the same from the outside, but it felt entirely alien. I reached into the dark depths of my leather purse and pulled out my heavy keychain. My hand was shaking so badly from the pain and the adrenaline that the metal keys clattered loudly against each other. I isolated the heavy brass house key, the same key I had used every single day for the past 4 years. I leaned my weight heavily against the solid mahogany front door, gasping for air, as a fresh wave of dizziness washed over my vision. I carefully inserted the brass key into the center deadbolt, expecting the familiar satisfying click of the lock disengaging. I tried to turn the key to the right. It refused to budge. I frowned, thinking my trembling hand simply lacked the necessary strength to turn the mechanism. I gripped the key with both hands and twisted it forcefully. The metal dug painfully into my fingers, but the lock remained completely frozen. A sickening dread pooled at the bottom of my stomach. I pulled the key out and looked closely at the metal lock cylinder set into the thick wood. The circular rim of the lock was shiny, unscratched silver. It was completely new. The original hardware I had installed was heavily tarnished antique brass. I stepped back, my heart dropping completely into my shoes as the devastating truth crashed over me. Darnell had not just emptied my bank accounts and stolen my commercial property. While I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, bleeding and alone, my husband had legally locked me out of my own home. The sheer audacity of the changed locks sent a fresh wave of adrenaline coursing through my veins, temporarily overriding the agonizing burning in my stomach. Darnell had meticulously planned every single detail of this hostile takeover. He knew I was an incredibly organized woman who always carried her primary house keys, so he had a locksmith change the deadbolts the moment I was wheeled into the operating room. However, there was one crucial detail my husband had completely overlooked. When I originally purchased this property 5 years ago, long before I ever met him, I hired a contractor to install a discreet digital lockbox bolted to the brick foundation behind the heavy azalea bushes lining the side yard. Inside that waterproof box was a master key that bypassed the front deadbolt entirely and opened the heavy side door leading directly into the laundry room. I dragged myself off the front porch, clinging to the brick siding of the house for physical support. Every step through the thick garden mulch sent sharp jolts of pain radiating from my surgical staples. I pushed past the dense branches of the azalea bushes, ignoring the sharp twigs scratching my bare arms. I dropped to my knees in the dirt, breathing heavily as I entered the 4-digit code into the rusted lockbox. The metal door popped open. I grabbed the spare key, my fingers gripping it like a lifeline. I crawled the short distance to the side entrance, hoisted myself up using the door handle, and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the cool, dark laundry room. The familiar scent of my expensive lavender fabric softener felt completely out of place against the horrifying reality of my situation. I stood perfectly still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim lighting while actively listening to the sounds of the house. That was when I heard it. A loud, heavy bass beat vibrating through the ceiling directly above me. The music was coming from the second floor. Specifically, it was coming from my master bedroom. I gripped the handrail of the staircase, pulling my own body weight up the hardwood steps, one agonizing inch at a time. I kept my breathing as quiet as humanly possible, swallowing the groans of pain rising in my throat. As I reached the second-floor landing, the loud hip-hop music became deafening. The door to my master suite was wide open. I stepped cautiously into the doorway and froze, absolutely paralyzed by the scene unfolding inside my own personal sanctuary. My massive walk-in closet had been completely ransacked. Expensive silk dresses and tailored business suits were carelessly thrown across the white duvet of my bed. But what truly stopped my heart was the sight of Shanice standing near my vanity. She was aggressively tossing my authentic Chanel handbags and velvet jewelry boxes into a series of large brown cardboard moving boxes stacked carelessly on my expensive Persian rug. She was humming along to the music, swaying her hips side to side, treating the blatant theft of my personal property like a fun weekend shopping spree. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my blood-stained shirt. "What exactly do you think you are doing, Shanice?" I asked. My voice was surprisingly calm, cutting cleanly through the loud music. Shanice gasped loudly and spun around, dropping a heavy gold necklace onto the floor. Her eyes widened in genuine shock as she took in my pale, sweating face and the hospital gown visibly peeking out from underneath my blazer. For a fleeting second, she looked like a guilty child caught stealing candy. But true to her toxic nature, that fleeting guilt instantly hardened into arrogant defiance. She did not scream, she did not apologize. She simply reached over to the speaker on my nightstand and turned the music down. She looked me up and down, a cruel smirk slowly spreading across her face. "Wow, you look completely unhinged, Charmaine," she said, crossing her arms to mirror my posture. "Darnell warned me you might try to escape the hospital. He said you had a massive mental breakdown from the stress of your job, and they were transferring you to a psychiatric facility for long-term observation. I am just here safeguarding your expensive things before you do something crazy and destroy them." "Safeguarding my things," I repeated, my voice dripping with pure venom. "You are packing my jewelry into moving boxes. You are stealing from me." Shanice rolled her eyes dramatically, stepping over a pile of my discarded clothes. "Oh, please, stop being so dramatic. You always exaggerate everything. Darnell is my brother, which makes this his house too. He asked me to secure these assets because you are clearly not in your right mind. You should be thanking me for helping out the family during your little mental health crisis." Her words made me physically sick, but they perfectly encapsulated the deep-rooted toxic entitlement that poisoned her entire family dynamic. In her mind and in the minds of her parents and extended relatives, my marriage to Darnell was not a partnership of equals. It was a golden ticket. It was a financial come-up for their entire bloodline. They firmly believed that because Darnell had successfully married a wealthy, independent woman, all of my hard-earned resources automatically became communal family property. They hid their blatant greed behind the sacred cultural guise of blood loyalty. They constantly preached that family always takes care of family, but that rule only applied when I was the one doing the providing. When I needed a husband to sit by my hospital bed, I was suddenly an outsider again. To Shanice, my designer bags and expensive jewelry were not items I had worked 80-hour weeks to purchase. They were just spoils of war, rightful compensation for her brother having to put up with a woman who refused to shrink herself to make him feel big. "Put the necklace down," Shanice I commanded, stepping fully into the bedroom. "Get out of my house right now before I call the police." Shanice laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound that echoed off the high ceilings. She actually took a step toward me, closing the distance between us. Her face twisted into an ugly mask of superiority. "You are going to call the police," she sneered. "On what phone? Darnell already shut off your cellular service. And even if you could call them, what exactly are you going to say? Look at yourself, Charmaine. You are standing here covered in blood wearing a hospital gown, looking like a complete crazy person who just escaped a mental ward. Darnell has the medical paperwork proving you are legally incapacitated. If the cops show up here, they are not going to arrest me. They're going to strap you into a straitjacket and haul you back to the psych ward for trespassing in Darnell's house. Trespassing in Darnell's house." The sheer audacity of her statement hung heavy in the air. This house was fully paid off in my name before I even knew Darnell existed, but arguing with her was completely pointless. She was a deeply delusional woman operating under the false protection of her brother's fraudulent legal paperwork. She wanted a screaming match. She wanted me to lose my temper, to attack her, to give her the exact physical proof she needed to validate Darnell's lies about my mental instability. She stepped even closer, invading my personal space, her eyes practically begging me to swing at her. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression completely blank, and slowly turned my back on her. I walked straight into my massive master bathroom, the only room in the house equipped with a solid core wood door and a heavy-duty deadbolt lock I had installed myself after a previous break-in scare. I stepped inside the cool, marble-tiled bathroom and firmly pushed the heavy door shut right in her face. I engaged the deadbolt, the loud click echoing with finality. I heard Shanice laugh from the bedroom. "Go ahead and lock yourself in there, crazy lady," she yelled through the wood. "I am going to finish packing my new bags, and then I am calling the police to come collect you." I ignored her threats. I slid down the hard wooden door until I was sitting flat on the cold marble floor, my legs pulled tightly against my chest. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Shanice was right about my cellular service being cut off. But Darnell did not know I kept a secondary electronic SIM active. I switched networks. The service bars returned. I locked the screen and stared forward into the dark space. The cool surface of the marble floor offered a small measure of relief against my burning skin, but it did nothing to stop the steady throbbing radiating from my midsection. I looked down at my pale hands. My fingers were slick with sweat and smeared with my own dried blood from where I had violently ripped the intravenous needle out of my vein. A fresh, warm dampness began to seep through the front of my silk blouse, indicating that my hurried escape and the physical exertion of climbing the stairs had likely torn one or more of my surgical staples. The scent of blood mingled sickeningly with the expensive floral perfume Shanice had sprayed around my bedroom moments before. I closed my eyes and rested the back of my head against the solid wood of the locked door. I could hear Shanice moving heavily on the other side, the distinct sound of packing tape ripping loudly off a plastic dispenser as she enthusiastically sealed away my prized possessions. The sheer violation of it all threatened to crush the last remaining fragments of my sanity. I needed help. I needed someone who possessed the authority and the sheer willpower to instantly halt the catastrophic destruction of my life. My biological mother, Elaine, was completely out of the question. Calling her would only invite more toxic judgment and cruel remarks about how my intense career had finally driven my husband away. There was only one person in my entire universe who commanded the absolute respect and terrifying authority required for a moment like this. I unlocked my phone, opened my contacts, and scrolled down to the name saved simply as Mama Gloria. Mama Gloria was my paternal grandmother, the fiercely loyal widow of my grandfather Theodore. While my parents offered nothing but emotional distance and conditional approval, Mama Gloria had always been my anchor. She was a legendary figure in our community, a retired state judge who had spent 40 years presiding over a courtroom with an iron gavel and a perfectly pressed judicial robe. She was a formidable, highly respected matriarch in the Black community of Atlanta. She was the kind of woman who commanded complete silence the moment she walked into a room. She possessed a brilliant legal mind and a zero-tolerance policy for foolishness, disrespect, or manipulation. From the very beginning, she had seen right through Darnell. While the rest of his family praised his expensive suits and flashy lifestyle, Mama Gloria had quietly observed his massive insecurities and relentless greed. She warned me exactly once on the night before my wedding that a man who constantly needs to prove his dominance will eventually try to destroy the woman who highlights his weaknesses. Despite her deep misgivings, she attended the wedding. She stayed quiet and maintained a polite, respectful distance for the past 5 years, honoring my choice and allowing me to make my own marital mistakes without interference. But this was no longer just a mistake. This was a hostile criminal takeover. I pressed the call button and brought the phone to my ear. My hand shook violently, rattling the device against my cheek. The line rang once, twice. On the third ring, the call connected. "Hello," a strong, resonant voice answered. "Mama Gloria," I whispered, my voice immediately cracking. The moment I heard her voice, the heavy, emotional dam I had been desperately holding back since waking up in that sterile hospital room finally shattered completely. A choked sob ripped through my throat, sending a searing spasm of physical pain across my freshly stitched abdomen. I clamped my free hand over my mouth, trying to stifle the pathetic sound, but the tears were already spilling hot and fast down my cheeks. "Charmaine," Mama Gloria asked, her tone instantly shifting from polite greeting to sharp concern. "Baby, what is wrong? Where are you?" "Darnell called the family group chat this morning and said you had a severe mental breakdown from work exhaustion. He said you were being safely transferred to a private psychiatric wellness facility out of state and that no one was allowed to contact you for at least a month." The sheer magnitude of his calculated lie made my stomach physically heave. He had already laid the foundational groundwork for my permanent disappearance. He had successfully isolated me from my entire support network before I even woke up from the anesthesia. "It is a lie," I gasped, struggling to pull enough oxygen into my burning lungs. "It is all a massive, disgusting lie. I did not have a mental breakdown. I had a ruptured appendix. I almost died, Mama Gloria. I was rushed into emergency surgery 3 days ago. Darnell never even came to the hospital. He left me there to rot. He ignored the doctors. He let my premium health insurance lapse so the hospital would classify me as an abandoned patient. He did it on purpose to falsely trigger the medical power of attorney clause he secretly slipped into our joint tax documents 2 months ago." The line went completely silent. It was not the silence of someone who was confused. It was the terrifying, heavy silence of a retired judge actively absorbing the details of a major felony. "Keep talking," she commanded quietly. Her voice was pure steel. I wiped my tear-soaked face with the back of my trembling hand. He completely drained my joint checking account. I continued, my words rushing out in a frantic, desperate stream. "He took all of my corporate bonuses. The balance is entirely gone. But that is not even the worst part. He used the fraudulent medical power of attorney to authorize the sale of Grandfather Theodore's commercial building downtown. I received an automated digital alert from the property management firm just an hour ago. He is initializing the deed transfer right now. He is currently sitting at Le Petit Chateau restaurant with his investors, celebrating the $5 million sale with champagne, while I am sitting here bleeding on the floor." I paused, gasping for breath, the physical exertion of speaking so quickly making my vision swim with dark spots. On the other side of the bathroom door, I heard the heavy thud of another cardboard box hitting the hardwood floor, followed by the muffled sound of Shanice singing along to the radio. Where exactly are you right now? Charmaine, Mama Gloria asked. Her voice lacked any trace of panic. It was methodical, cold, and entirely focused. I am sitting on the floor of my master bathroom. I sobbed, the humiliation of the situation finally breaking my spirit. I ripped my intravenous line out and snuck out of the hospital through the basement loading dock. I took a car home, but Darnell changed all the deadbolts on the front doors. I had to break into my own house using the hidden emergency lockbox. And now Shanice is standing in my bedroom. She is laughing and casually packing up all of my designer clothes, my expensive handbags, and my personal jewelry. She told me Darnell gave her strict permission to safeguard my assets because I am legally insane. She threatened to call the police and have me forcibly committed if I try to stop her. She is stealing everything, Mama Gloria. They are taking my entire life. I pressed my forehead heavily against the cold marble tiles, my body trembling with a mixture of profound physical agony and deep psychological exhaustion. I had spent my entire adult life working relentlessly to build a secure, independent existence. I had carefully curated my career fiercely, protected my financial portfolio, and proudly maintained the incredible legacy my grandfather entrusted to me. In less than a week, a man I loved and deeply trusted had completely dismantled it all, utilizing the very legal system Mama Gloria had dedicated her life to upholding. I felt entirely broken, violently stripped of my dignity, my resources, and my physical health. I waited for her to speak desperately, needing her wisdom, her comfort, or even her stern reprimand for trusting Darnell in the first place. I heard the faint sound of a heavy wooden drawer opening through the phone speaker. I heard the distinctive rustle of thick parchment paper and the click of a metal briefcase latch. Mama Gloria was not crying. She was not offering empty platitudes about how everything happens for a reason or how God never gives us more than we can handle. She was aggressively mobilizing. Charmaine listened to me very carefully, she said. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not engage with that foolish girl outside your door. Let her pack. It does not matter. Darnell thinks he is a clever criminal because he forged a few signatures. But he is a deeply arrogant amateur who just made the fatal mistake of attacking my bloodline. Put a towel over your stitches, baby. In 2 hours, I will make them wish they were never born. The silence in the bathroom was heavy, broken only by my shallow breathing, and the muffled sounds of Shanice continuing her pillage in the bedroom. I sat perfectly still on the marble floor, staring at the illuminated screen of my phone. The service bars remained strong. I was connected to the outside world again, completely bypassing the digital isolation Darnell had attempted to enforce. I needed to conserve my battery, so I let the screen fade to black. I closed my eyes and focused entirely on the rhythmic throbbing of my surgical wounds, using the physical pain to anchor my raging emotions. I needed to remain perfectly clear-headed for Mama Gloria to execute her plan. Less than 5 minutes passed before the dark space of the bathroom was suddenly illuminated again. The phone vibrated violently against my palm, the sudden buzzing sound echoing sharply off the tiled walls. I looked down at the caller identification. It was Darnell. A sick wave of nausea rolled through my stomach, far worse than any side effect from the anesthesia. He was actually calling me. After abandoning me for days, draining my accounts, and legally locking me out of my own home, he had the absolute audacity to dial my number. My first instinct was to reject the call, to block his number, and let Mama Gloria annihilate him without another word spoken between us. But a colder, more strategic part of my brain took over. If I ignored him, he might realize I was actively moving against him. He might accelerate the sale or alter his plans. I needed to keep him comfortable. I needed him to believe his sinister narrative was working perfectly. I took a deep, agonizing breath, forced my vocal cords to relax, and swiped the green button to accept the call. I brought the speaker to my ear, but remained completely silent, waiting for him to make the first move. "Charmaine, baby, is that you?" Darnell asked. His voice was incredibly soft, dripping with a sickening layer of manufactured concern. It was the exact tone he used when we were dating, the gentle, reassuring timbre that used to make me feel completely safe and protected. Hearing it now made my skin crawl. It was a flawless auditory illusion designed entirely to manipulate me. "Oh, thank God you picked up your phone," he continued, his voice catching slightly, as if he were holding back tears of profound relief. "I have been out of my mind with worry for the past 3 days. I have been calling the hospital non-stop, but they kept giving me the runaround. Then the head surgeon finally called me an hour ago and told me the most terrifying news." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth ached. "What news, Darnell?" I asked, intentionally keeping my voice weak, breathy, and slightly slurred. I made myself sound exactly like a woman heavily sedated and confused by her surroundings. He let out a long, dramatic sigh. "The doctor said you had a severe adverse reaction to the heavy anesthesia they used during the emergency appendectomy. He told me you woke up completely disoriented, suffering from intense paranoid hallucinations. They said you actually ripped your intravenous lines out and somehow wandered out of the recovery ward. Baby, where are you right now? The hospital administration is actively looking for you. You are in serious medical danger." The sheer sociopathic ease with which he spun this elaborate lie was breathtaking. He had fully weaponized my medical crisis, using it to build an impenetrable wall of deniability. If I told anyone he stole my money, he would simply point to this fake diagnosis of paranoid hallucinations. He was gaslighting me in real time, trying to convince me that my own mind was actively betraying me. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the overwhelming urge to scream the truth through the speaker, to tell him I saw the bank statements, I saw the property transfer email, and I saw his sister currently packing my belongings. But I swallowed the bitter rage. I forced myself to play the exact role he had written for me. "I am home," I whispered, letting a pathetic whimper escape my lips. "I took a car home. I was so scared, Darnell. I woke up and you were not there. Everything was so confusing and the nurses were so mean to me. I just wanted to be in my own bed." I heard him exhale sharply, a sound that conveyed deep masculine frustration, masked as spousal concern. "Charmaine, you cannot be at the house," he said smoothly. "You need to be under strict medical supervision. Listen to me, baby. I am going to call an ambulance to come pick you up and take you to a specialized private wellness clinic. They have the best doctors there. They are going to flush the bad anesthesia out of your system and fix your mind. You just need to sit tight, unlock the front door, and wait for the paramedics. Do not try to move. Do not try to call anyone else. You are not thinking clearly right now." I leaned my head back against the solid door. "Where are you?" I asked, letting a tear actually fall from my eye, the physical pain and emotional exhaustion blending perfectly into my performance. "Why are you not here with me? If you are so worried, why did you not come to the house?" Darnell paused for a fraction of a second. It was the microscopic hesitation of a liar rapidly constructing his next alibi. "I am at the church, baby," he answered, his voice dropping an octave into a solemn, reverent register. "I have been sitting in the sanctuary of First Baptist since dawn. I have been on my knees praying with Pastor Thomas, asking God to heal your mind and bring you back to me safely. I felt so helpless when the doctor said you were hallucinating. I needed spiritual guidance." My stomach physically revolted at his words. He was actively using the sanctity of our church, the very place we exchanged our wedding vows, as a convenient shield for his criminal enterprise. I knew exactly where he was. The tracking application had placed him firmly at Le Petit Chateau, sipping expensive champagne and laughing with his wealthy investors. But I did not challenge him. I fed his massive ego exactly what it craved. "Okay," I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly. "I am so tired, Darnell. My stomach hurts so much. Everything hurts." "I know, baby. I know," he cooed softly. "Just rest your eyes. Let your husband handle everything. I have taken over the finances temporarily just to make sure our bills get paid while you recover. I am handling all the heavy business so you do not have to worry about a single thing. I will be at the house as soon as I finish praying, I promise." Those two words hung in the air, heavy with toxic irony. He was promising to return to a house he had already locked me out of after finishing a prayer he never actually started. Okay, I said, my voice a faint breath. I will wait for you. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the button to end the call. The moment the digital connection severed, the weak persona I had projected vanished. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the agonizing conversation finally began to crash, leaving me shaking violently on the cold marble floor. My muscles spasmed, and the sharp stinging in my abdomen flared with a vengeance. I carefully adjusted the blood-soaked towel I had pressed against my torn surgical staples, wincing as the rough cotton rubbed against the raw flesh. I needed to stay perfectly conscious. I needed to survive the next 2 hours until Mama Gloria arrived to unleash hell upon my enemies. As I sat there regulating my shallow breathing, the loud sounds of ripping packing tape in the adjacent bedroom finally stopped. I heard the heavy thud of Shanice dropping a cardboard box onto the floor. Then I heard the familiar digital chime of a phone connecting a call. Shanice began speaking loudly, making zero effort to lower her voice. She believed I was either incapacitated by my supposed mental breakdown or simply too weak to pose any real threat. "Yeah, I am at the house right now," Shanice said, her voice dripping with pure arrogance. "I am almost done packing up the master closet. You should see all this designer stuff, girl. It is a gold mine." There was a brief pause as the person on the other end spoke. Shanice laughed. "Oh, do not even worry about her," she sneered. "She is locked in the bathroom acting crazy. Darnell just texted me. He is closing the deal at the restaurant right now. He said the buyer brought the cash." I remained perfectly still on the bathroom floor, listening to Shanice practically salivate over my stolen belongings. She was eagerly listing off the designer brand names to her friend on the phone, mentally calculating how much money she could make by pawning my life away. Her sharp, arrogant laughter pierced through the heavy oak door. Then, without any warning, a massive, deafening crash echoed from the first floor of the house. It sounded like a bomb had detonated in the front hallway. The heavy wood of the front door splintered violently, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the hardwood floors. Shanice shrieked instantly, dropping her phone. The loud, aggressive footsteps did not hesitate. They marched rapidly up the main staircase, shaking the entire house with each heavy stride. A deep, booming voice thundered through the second-floor hallway, commanding absolute authority. The voice belonged to Uncle Jerome. He was Mama Gloria's youngest brother, a heavily built, deeply intimidating man who had spent 30 years as a precinct captain for the local police department before quietly retiring. He did not possess a single ounce of patience for criminals, and he definitely did not have any patience for Darnell's entitled family members. I heard Shanice stammering, her previous arrogance evaporating into pure panic. "Who are you?" she screamed. "You cannot be in here. This is my brother's house. I am calling the cops." Uncle Jerome let out a dark, humorless chuckle that chilled the air. "Go ahead and call them little girl," he growled, his voice vibrating through the walls. "I trained half the officers in this district. They would love to see how I handle a blatant home invasion. Now step away from those boxes and get your hands where I can see them." Shanice began to hyperventilate loudly. She tried to yell, tried to invoke Darnell's name, but Uncle Jerome completely ignored her pathetic protests. I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy cardboard box being kicked violently across the master bedroom floor. Then came the physical struggle. "Jerome, you are hurting me!" Shanice wailed, her voice pitching into a hysterical shriek. "You are completely out of your league," he fired back effortlessly. "You are trespassing on private property, attempting grand larceny, and threatening the rightful homeowner. You are lucky I am escorting you out the front door instead of throwing you out the second-story window today." I listened to the satisfying sound of Uncle Jerome physically dragging Shanice out of my bedroom. She kicked and screamed the entire way down the staircase, her fake designer heels clattering wildly against the wooden steps. A few moments later, I heard the heavy thud of Shanice being physically deposited onto the front lawn, followed by the successive crashes of her counterfeit luxury bags and the cardboard boxes she had packed being violently thrown out right behind her. The house fell completely silent. The immediate threat was neutralized. Then I heard a gentle rhythmic tapping on the bathroom door panel. "Charmaine, baby," a calm, steady voice called out. "It is Mama Gloria. You can open the door now." My hands shook as I reached up and turned the heavy deadbolt. I pulled the door open and collapsed forward. Mama Gloria caught me effortlessly. She was dressed in a pristine charcoal gray tailored suit, her silver hair styled flawlessly, radiating an aura of absolute power and undeniable grace. She did not coddle me. She looked quickly at the blood seeping through my shirt, assessed my physical condition with a sharp gaze, and immediately went into full-blown legal battle mode. She stated, "We do not have time for tears today," her voice carrying the commanding cadence of a seasoned judge issuing a final verdict. "We have exactly 45 minutes to get downtown and stop Darnell from signing the final transfer documents with the private buyers. If his signature touches that final page, the legal mess will take years to untangle. We end this right now." She turned and gestured to a large leather garment bag she had draped over my vanity chair. "I brought you a fresh suit," she explained. "You are a highly successful corporate executive. You are going to walk into that luxury restaurant looking exactly like the powerful woman you are, not a victim who just escaped a medical ward. Put it on. I will help you with the bandages." Over the next 10 minutes, Mama Gloria worked with ruthless efficiency. She helped me strip off the blood-stained hospital gown and sweatpants, expertly taping a thick stack of sterile gauze over my fresh surgical incisions to stop the bleeding. The physical pain was absolutely excruciating, but the burning desire for absolute vengeance served as a potent anesthetic. She helped me slip into the crisp, white cotton button-down blouse and the sharp, black tailored trousers she had brought. As I buttoned the cuffs, she walked over to the bed and opened a thick, heavy black leather binder. The binder was stuffed with hundreds of pages of legal documents, bank statements, and court filings. "This is your ammunition," she said, tapping the leather cover with her manicured fingernail. I pulled the medical records directly from the hospital administration 10 minutes before I arrived here. "I have the sworn statement from your attending surgeon confirming that you are of perfectly sound mind and extremely clear functional body awareness. It states clearly that your temporary disorientation was strictly a standard reaction to the anesthesia. Darnell's claim of your mental incapacitation is completely voided. He has absolutely no legal standing to invoke the medical power of attorney today." I stared at the binder, feeling a surge of profound gratitude. Mama Gloria had single-handedly dismantled his entire false narrative in less than an hour. But my chest tightened with anxiety. "What about the property deed?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "He already initialized the transfer. He has the buyer sitting right there at the table with the initial cash. If he forged my signature on the primary authorization forms, how do we prove it before the transaction clears the federal banking system?" Mama Gloria closed the heavy binder and looked at me with a completely unreadable expression. A slow, deeply terrifying smile spread across her face. It was the exact smile she used to give in the courtroom right before she handed down a maximum prison sentence. "Darnell is a deeply arrogant man," she said softly, stepping closer to me. "And arrogant men always make the exact same fatal mistake. They assume they are the absolute smartest person in the room without actually reading the fine print." She reached into her suit pocket and pulled out a single neatly folded sheet of heavy yellow parchment paper. It looked incredibly old, the edges frayed and the ink slightly faded. She held it up carefully in the dim light of the bedroom. "When your grandfather Theodore purchased that commercial building 40 years ago, he knew exactly how much wealth it would eventually generate," she explained. "He also knew that wealth attracts greedy, manipulative people. People exactly like your absolutely pathetic husband. So before he passed away and left the property directly in your name, he asked me to draft a very specific legal addendum to the original deed. A secret addendum that is not publicly listed on the standard county tax registry. Darnell could not have possibly seen it when he forged the transfer documents because it only exists in my private judicial vault." I looked at the yellow paper, my heart pounding aggressively against my ribs. "What does the addendum say?" I asked, holding my breath. Mama Gloria handed the paper to me. Her dark eyes flashed with brilliant calculating intensity. It says that the property is permanently bound by an irrevocable generational family trust, she stated clearly. And according to the ironclad terms of that trust, if any spouse, partner, or outside entity attempts to transfer the deed while the primary beneficiary is medically incapacitated, the transaction is not merely blocked. It automatically triggers a direct notification to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for suspected criminal wire fraud and attempted grand larceny. I stared at her, the sheer magnitude of the trap Darnell had blindly walked into washing over me. Mama Gloria checked her gold wristwatch. Darnell is not just trying to sell your building, Charmaine. He is actively committing a massive federal crime. He thinks he is brilliantly securing his financial future, but he is actually signing his own prison sentence. The buyers he is sitting with right now are going to be legally implicated the moment that pen touches the paper. We need to leave right now, she commanded, grabbing the thick legal binder off the bed. Uncle Jerome is waiting in the vehicle outside. We are going to drive straight to Le Petit Chateau. You are going to walk right up to his table, look him directly in the eye, and detonate his entire fraudulent life. I nodded, the gravity of her words settling heavily in my chest. I grabbed my purse and followed her. We walked past the empty boxes, moving swiftly down the staircase and out the door. Uncle Jerome was idling at the curb in his black SUV. He had already dealt with Shanice, who had fled the neighborhood on foot. I climbed into the back seat, wincing as I settled onto the dark leather. Mama Gloria slid in beside me, and Uncle Jerome immediately shifted the vehicle into drive. We sped away from the townhouse, leaving my shattered domestic life in the rearview mirror. Atlanta traffic was brutal, but Uncle Jerome drove with the calculated precision of a former police captain, weaving seamlessly through the congested lanes. The interior of the SUV was silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal. I leaned my head against the cool glass, watching the blur of the city skyline approaching. My mind was racing, processing the magnitude of the legal trap Mama Gloria had just revealed. I turned to her. "How exactly does the trust trigger a federal alert?" I asked her quietly. I thought real estate transactions were handled at the county level. Mama Gloria adjusted her pearl necklace. "Under normal circumstances they are," she explained. "But we structured the family trust as a multi-state corporate entity with banking ties that cross state lines. Any unauthorized attempt to liquidate the primary assets automatically falls under federal jurisdiction. Furthermore, the clause regarding your medical incapacitation was drafted with extremely precise language. If a spouse attempts to claim you are mentally unfit to manage the trust, they must provide court-certified medical evaluations from 3 independent state psychiatrists. Darnell completely bypassed that legal requirement. He forged a standard power of attorney and submitted it directly to the main property management firm. The moment their digital system processed his fraudulent signature, the trust protocol recognized the illegal bypass. It generated an immediate automated alert, flagged as priority wire fraud, and submitted it directly to the Federal Banking Commission. I stared at her in absolute awe. Darnell thought he was exploiting a simple loophole, but he had tripped an invisible wire connected to the federal government. He was blinded by his greed and never bothered to hire a single competent lawyer to review the deed history. But an automated alert could take weeks for an agency to officially investigate it. I nervously pointed out, my anxiety momentarily flaring. By the time a federal auditor actually looks at the system flag, he will have already signed the transfer, taken the buyer's cash, and hidden it in some offshore account. We will spend years fighting to get the property back in civil court. Mama Gloria let out a soft, dismissive scoff. "Do you honestly believe I would leave the fate of our family legacy up to the sluggish pace of a bureaucratic computer system?" she asked rhetorically. The moment I received the notification about Darnell, I made a single phone call to a very old and powerful friend, District Attorney Carter. He owes me a massive professional favor from my days on the bench. When I explained that a prominent local finance broker was currently executing a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud using forged medical documents, his entire office moved with unprecedented speed. The district attorney immediately contacted the regional director of the FBI White Collar Crime Division. They ran a rapid background check on Darnell and discovered massive irregularities in his personal tax filings over the past 3 years. He has been moving money erratically, drowning in hidden debts he never told you about. The feds realized this was not just an isolated incident of spousal theft. This was the desperate act of a man trying to cover up a mountain of financial crimes. So they escalated the situation from a simple initial inquiry to an active criminal investigation within an hour. Mama Gloria reached over and placed her warm hand over mine. We are not just driving downtown to interrupt a fancy steak dinner. The people Darnell is sitting with right now are not just innocent private buyers. District Attorney Carter confirmed that one of the investors at that table is actually an undercover federal agent who was already investigating the buyer group for money laundering. Darnell unwittingly chose the absolute very worst possible criminals to sell your building to. When he pulled his fraudulent power of attorney out to finalize the sale, he provided the federal agents with the exact physical evidence they needed to arrest everyone at the table. This is a highly coordinated federal sting operation. We are simply arriving to deliver the final nail in his coffin. The sheer scale of the situation hit me like a physical blow. My husband was not just going to face a messy divorce. He was going to face decades in a federal penitentiary. The man who had mocked my personal ambition was currently sitting in a luxury five-star restaurant, completely oblivious to the massive legal anvil hovering directly over his ignorant head. I looked at Uncle Jerome in the rearview mirror. His eyes were locked on the road, radiating anticipation. He was driving us straight into the epicenter of a criminal takedown. The physical pain in my abdomen became a dull hum, overpowered by the rushing tide of impending justice. We entered the heart of downtown Atlanta, the towering glass skyscrapers casting long, dark shadows over the streets. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished office windows. We turned onto Peachtree Street, approaching the exclusive block where Le Petit Chateau was located. The restaurant stood out among the modern architecture, an elegant stone building designed to look like a historic European estate. Expensive luxury cars were lined up along the curved cobblestone driveway. I could see the valets in their crisp red uniforms rushing rapidly back and forth. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm. I was about to publicly destroy my marriage. I was about to look the man I once loved directly in the eyes and watch his entire world collapse completely. Uncle Jerome did not slow down to join the orderly queue of luxury vehicles waiting for the valet service. He aggressively swerved the SUV out of the line, bypassing a gleaming silver Bentley, and pulled the vehicle directly into the designated VIP fire lane right in front of the ornate wooden entrance doors. He slammed the transmission into park, the heavy vehicle jerking to a very sudden, violent halt. Almost immediately, a young valet rushed forward, waving his hands frantically to wave us quickly off. He had a very panicked look on his face, clearly terrified his manager would scream at him for allowing such an unauthorized vehicle to block the prestigious entrance. "Sir, you absolutely cannot park here," the young valet shouted, jogging up to the black driver's side window. "This is an active fire lane, and it is strictly reserved for emergency vehicles only. I am going to need you to move this truck immediately, or I will have to call for a tow truck." Uncle Jerome did not say a single word. He calmly pushed his heavy door open, forcing the young valet to step back quickly. Jerome stepped out of the vehicle, his massive frame towering over the nervous employee. He reached inside his tailored gray jacket and smoothly pulled out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open with a practiced flick of his wrist, revealing a gleaming gold retired police captain badge pinned next to his official state identification. The valet stopped talking instantly, his eyes darting from the gold badge to Uncle Jerome's uncompromising, hardened face. The young man swallowed hard and took a submissive step backward. "Do not touch the vehicle," Uncle Jerome commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that brooked absolutely no argument. "We have official business inside." "Yes, sir." The valet stammered very quickly. Understood. Mama Gloria opened her door and stepped out onto the cobblestone driveway. She adjusted her suit jacket, her expression perfectly serene. I took a deep breath, mentally bracing my own core, and pushed myself out of the back seat. My legs felt slightly weak, but the bandages held my incisions tightly. I stood up straight, smoothing the wrinkles from my white blouse. Uncle Jerome walked around the front of the SUV and stood protectively by my side. Mama Gloria walked ahead of us, holding the thick black legal binder tightly against her chest. She approached the massive wooden entrance doors without hesitation. The maitre d' reached for the brass handle to pull the front door open, clearly preparing to ask us for our reservation. But Mama Gloria pushed the heavy oak panel open herself. She swept past the stunned young maitre d' without making eye contact. Uncle Jerome and I followed closely behind her, stepping out of the bright afternoon sunlight and directly into the dimly lit, opulent dining room. The air inside Le Petit Chateau was thick with the rich scents of seared Wagyu beef, black truffles, and expensive botanical perfumes. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, providing an elegant soundtrack to the low murmurs of Atlanta elite conducting high-stakes business over plates of miniature edible art. The lighting was strategically dim, casting warm golden glows across the plush velvet booths and the pristine white tablecloths. Every single detail of the establishment was meticulously designed to project an atmosphere of exclusive, untouchable wealth. It was the exact type of environment where a man like Darnell felt he inherently belonged, despite having zero actual capital to justify his presence. I stood near the heavy velvet drapes of the entrance foyer, letting my eyes rapidly adjust to the ambient lighting. My abdominal muscles screamed in protest with every shallow breath I took, but the searing physical pain only sharpened my mental focus. Mama Gloria stood firmly at my left shoulder, radiating a terrifying calm. Uncle Jerome flanked my right side, his sheer physical size parting the immediate crowd of waiting patrons like Moses at the Red Sea. I scanned the massive dining room, bypassing the crowded center tables and focusing my attention entirely on the elevated VIP section located along the far back wall. The VIP area was separated from the main floor by an ornate brass railing and featured panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the vibrant city skyline. It took me less than 3 seconds to locate him. Darnell was sitting at the absolute best table in the restaurant, positioned directly in the center of the elevated platform, so the entire dining room could witness his perceived importance. He was wearing the custom navy blue Tom Ford suit I had paid for last Christmas. His posture was sickeningly relaxed, his shoulders thrown back as he held court with 2 older, severely dressed Caucasian men sitting across from him. These had to be the private investors, the men who brought the cash to steal my family legacy. One of the men was actively reviewing a thick stack of legal documents resting on the table, holding a silver fountain pen loosely in his hand. The other man was laughing loudly at something Darnell had just said. A tall sommelier in a crisp black vest stood at attention next to their table, carefully presenting a massive green glass bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. The gold foil at the neck of the bottle gleamed sharply under the spotlight above their table. It was a $2,000 bottle of champagne, a celebratory, extravagant purchase Darnell was undoubtedly charging to the restaurant tab he fully intended to pay using my stolen money. Darnell smiled broadly, waving his hand dismissively at the sommelier to proceed. The sommelier expertly popped the cork with a muted, elegant sigh rather than a loud bang. He began pouring the pale, bubbling liquid into 3 tall crystal flutes. Darnell picked up his glass, holding it high in the air to command the attention of the 2 investors. Even from 50 feet away, I could hear the arrogant, booming cadence of his voice projecting across the quiet dining room. He wanted the surrounding tables to hear him. He wanted everyone to know he was closing a massive deal. "I want to thank you both for your incredible vision," Darnell proclaimed, his voice dripping with absolute faux humility. "Today is not just about a simple real estate transaction. It is about building a lasting legacy. It is about taking a piece of historic Atlanta property and elevating it to its maximum potential." My grandfather-in-law always said that wealth is built by those who are bold enough to seize the right opportunity. And today, gentlemen, we are seizing the future. Cheers to our new partnership. The sheer audacity of his speech made my blood boil violently in my veins. He was quoting Grandfather Theodore. He was actively using the hard-earned wisdom of the man whose legacy he was currently destroying to impress his criminal accomplices. I did not wait for the investors to clink their glasses. I took a step forward. My legs felt heavy, the shock of the torn surgical staples sending fresh waves of nausea rolling through my stomach, but Mama Gloria instantly linked her arm tightly through mine. She provided the physical support I needed without making me look weak. We began our walk across the main dining floor. Uncle Jerome walked a few paces ahead, creating a clear, unobstructed path directly to the VIP section. The effect of our entrance was immediate and deeply dramatic. Le Petit Chateau was a restaurant built on discretion and polite social rules. Our aggressive, unsmiling march completely shattered that delicate atmosphere. As we moved past the expensive tables, the low murmurs of conversation began to abruptly cease. Diners paused with their silver forks halfway to their mouths, turning their heads to stare at the bizarre procession. They saw a massive, intimidating man with a hardened police glare, an elegant older matriarch clutching a thick legal binder, and me. I knew I looked terrifying. I was wearing a sharp corporate suit, but my face was deathly pale and covered in a thin sheen of cold sweat. My posture was stiff, held together by medical tape and pure, unadulterated rage. The silence spread rapidly across the room, like a wave rolling from the front entrance all the way to the back wall, until the entire restaurant was completely dead quiet. The only sounds remaining were the soft classical music playing overhead and the heavy rhythmic tapping of Mama Gloria's designer heels against the polished hardwood floor. The sudden, oppressive silence finally caught Darnell's attention. He paused mid-laugh, the crystal champagne flute still hovering inches from his mouth. He turned his head casually, expecting to see a waiter dropping a tray or a celebrity entering the room. Instead, his eyes locked directly onto mine. I watched the arrogant, victorious smile completely vanish from his face in a fraction of a second. It was not a slow fade. It was an instant, violent deletion of his entire smug persona. The rich, healthy brown color of his skin literally drained away, leaving him looking sickly and ghost-white under the dining room lights. His eyes widened in absolute sheer terror. He stared at me as if he were looking at an actual ghost rising from a freshly dug grave. For a long, agonizing moment, he was completely paralyzed. His brain was violently short-circuiting, desperately trying to comprehend how the woman he had abandoned in a hospital bed, the woman whose phone was disconnected, the woman his sister was supposed to be currently guarding at a locked house, was suddenly standing in the middle of a Michelin-starred restaurant. The two investors noticed his sudden panic and turned in their chairs to look at us. They frowned, clearly confused by the tense interruption to their celebration. Darnell realized the investors were watching him. The desperate survival instincts of a cornered rat immediately kicked in. He knew he had to maintain control of the narrative, or the entire multi-million-dollar deal would collapse instantly. He slammed his champagne glass down onto the white tablecloth, spilling a small amount of the expensive liquid over the rim. He jumped up from his chair, violently pushing it back so hard it almost tipped over. He plastered a look of absolute frantic, terrified concern onto his sweating face. He rushed down the 2 short steps from the VIP platform and hurried toward me, holding his hands up in a placating, defensive gesture. He was acting his heart out, desperately trying to sell the lie to the entire room of wealthy onlookers. "Charmaine," he gasped loudly, ensuring his voice carried to the investors and the surrounding tables. "Baby, what are you doing here? How on earth did you escape the psychiatric ward?" "Oh my God, someone please call an ambulance right now," Darnell yelled, his voice cracking with manufactured panic. "My wife is experiencing a severe mental breakdown. She is completely delusional and a serious danger to herself. She needs to be sedated immediately." He reached out to grab my shoulders, intending to physically restrain me and drag me out of the restaurant before I could speak. He never made physical contact. Uncle Jerome stepped smoothly into his path, planting his massive hand firmly against the center of Darnell's chest. The physical force of the block stopped Darnell dead in his tracks, knocking the wind out of his lungs. "Do not touch her." Uncle Jerome growled, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal pitch. Darnell looked at Uncle Jerome, then looked at Mama Gloria, and finally looked back at me. The fake concern melted away, replaced by pure, cornered desperation. He tried to bypass Uncle Jerome, leaning to the side to address me directly. "Baby, please, you are embarrassing us in front of very important people," he hissed through gritted teeth, his tone switching from concerned husband to aggressive manipulator. "You need to go back to the hospital. You do not understand what you are ruining right now. Let me handle the business. Just go home." I stepped out from behind Uncle Jerome's protective shadow. I did not look at the investors. I did not look at the dozens of wealthy patrons staring at us. I locked my eyes exclusively on Darnell. I took one agonizing step forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing less than a foot away from his terrified face. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp odor of his nervous sweat. I looked down at the table behind him, noting the unsealed transfer deed resting next to the investor's fountain pen. It was completely unsigned. We had arrived exactly on time. I looked back at Darnell. He had picked his champagne flute back up during his frantic pacing, clutching the delicate crystal stem like a pathetic shield against his impending destruction. I raised my right hand, moving with terrifying, deliberate speed. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply swung my hand forward and violently slapped the crystal champagne flute directly out of his grip. The expensive glass flew out of his hand, smashing aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. The sharp, violent sound of shattering crystal echoed like a gunshot across the dead-silent fine dining room. The shards of expensive crystal scattered across the polished dark wood floor, glittering dangerously under the warm, ambient restaurant lighting. Drops of vintage champagne splashed onto Darnell's custom Italian leather shoes, but he did not even flinch to wipe them. He stood completely frozen in place, staring blankly at the broken glass, as if it represented his entire carefully constructed reality, shattering into a million irreparable pieces right before his eyes. The collective gasp from the surrounding wealthy tables was clearly audible, but I actively ignored the massive audience watching us. My focus remained entirely locked on the pathetic, sweating man standing before me. The two wealthy investors sitting at the VIP table were no longer smiling or looking amused by the sudden interruption. The older man holding the silver fountain pen, the one Mama Gloria had privately identified in the car as the undercover federal agent, slowly placed his expensive pen down next to the unsigned property transfer deed. He leaned back slowly in his plush velvet chair, folding his hands deliberately and heavily over his chest. His expression instantly transformed from that of a genial business partner to a cold, calculating, and highly suspicious legal observer. "What exactly is the meaning of this dramatic interruption?" Darnell the investor demanded, his voice low, but carrying a sharp edge of absolute unyielding authority. "You explicitly assured us during our previous meetings that your wife was fully on board with the rapid liquidation of this commercial asset and that all potential medical contingencies were legally cleared. I absolutely do not conduct multi-million-dollar real estate transactions under the dark cloud of messy domestic disputes or unclear ownership claims. If there is a legitimate problem with the property title, we are walking away from this table right now." Darnell violently spun around to face the angry investor, his shaking hands raised high in a frantic, desperate, placating gesture. "No, please do not walk away from the deal," he pleaded loudly, his voice cracking noticeably with sheer unadulterated desperation. "There is absolutely no problem with the property title or my legal right to sell. I have full and total legal authorization to manage her assets. This is just a terrible, unfortunate misunderstanding. My wife is currently suffering from a severe, highly unstable medical episode. She is heavily medicated with surgical painkillers and completely confused about her actual surroundings. She belongs safely resting in a hospital bed, not screaming inside a fine dining restaurant. He turned back to face me, his face twisting into a truly ugly mask of dark rage, poorly masked by fake spousal concern. Charmaine, you are ruining absolutely everything we have worked for over the past 5 years. I am just trying to build a secure financial future for our family. Stop acting crazy, and let me take you back to the private wellness clinic right now before you hurt yourself. I did not back down or show a single ounce of fear. The severe physical pain burning in my freshly stitched stomach was entirely eclipsed by the massive roaring inferno of my righteous anger. I took another aggressive step closer to the VIP table, physically forcing Darnell to retreat slightly against the glass window. I placed my bare hands firmly onto the edge of the pristine white tablecloth, leaning my upper body weight forward, and locked my burning eyes directly onto the two seated investors. "Do not let this pathetic man lie to you," I stated, my voice ringing out incredibly clear, steady and undeniably loud. I wanted every single wealthy patron sitting inside Le Petit Chateau to hear exactly what kind of heartless monster they were currently dining with. I am not suffering from a sudden mental breakdown, and I absolutely do not have an underlying psychiatric condition. Exactly 5 days ago, my appendix unexpectedly ruptured while I was at work. I was rushed immediately into emergency surgery and very nearly died from a highly severe septic bacterial infection. I spent the last 3 agonizing days lying completely alone in a dark hospital room because my supposedly loving husband purposely ignored 22 of my desperate phone calls. The older investor raised a thick gray eyebrow, his sharp gaze shifting instantly and dangerously toward Darnell's sweating face. Darnell opened his mouth to loudly interrupt my speech, but Uncle Jerome took one heavy, menacing step forward, crossing his massive muscular arms tightly over his broad chest. Darnell snapped his mouth shut instantly, swallowing hard as he looked at my uncle. He did not ignore my frantic hospital calls because he was busy working on a big deal. I continued, my voice echoing powerfully off the high vaulted ceiling. He purposefully ignored me because he desperately needed me to remain completely isolated and officially listed as an abandoned, unresponsive patient. He intentionally let my premium health insurance policy lapse so the hospital administration would be legally forced to classify me as temporarily incapacitated. While I was lying unconscious on a cold operating table, he quickly logged into our joint banking accounts and completely drained my entire life savings down to a negative balance. He stole every single dollar I earned working 80-hour weeks as a corporate software developer and wired the cash directly to an offshore holding account to exclusively fund his fake millionaire lifestyle. A very loud collective murmur of genuine shock and absolute disgust rippled through the surrounding dining tables. The wealthy patrons were entirely captivated by the raw, undeniable, horrific truth pouring freely from my lips. I pointed a slightly shaking finger directly at the center of Darnell's chest. He legally locked me out of my own fully paid house earlier today. He sent his highly entitled unemployed sister to gleefully pack up my designer clothes and expensive jewelry while I was bleeding alone on my bathroom floor. And the only possible reason he is sitting at this exclusive VIP table with you gentlemen right now is because he maliciously used that manufactured medical crisis to actively invoke a highly fraudulent power of attorney. He is actively attempting to sell you a historic commercial downtown building that belongs entirely and exclusively to my family legacy. If you sign that property transfer deed today, you are not buying prime commercial real estate. You are actively participating in grand larceny and knowingly purchasing stolen property from a desperate thief. The undercover federal agent looked coldly at Darnell, his eyes narrowing very dangerously. "Is any of this crazy story actually true, Darnell?" he asked calmly, his professional tone completely devoid of any previous friendly warmth. "Are you attempting to illegally sell a massive commercial asset you do not legitimately control?" The direct, highly aggressive accusation finally snapped Darnell completely out of his panicked, sweating paralysis. The cornered rat finally realized that playing the concerned, deeply loving husband was no longer working on the audience. His entire physical demeanor shifted violently and unpredictably. The visible fear vanished, replaced instantly by a dark, explosive, deeply toxic aggression that I had rarely seen during our entire 5 years of marriage. It was the defensive, deeply insecure rage of a very small man, desperately trying to physically assert his dominance over a situation he had entirely lost control of. He violently slammed his closed fist down hard onto the white table, loudly rattling the expensive silverware and making the remaining crystal champagne glasses tremble wildly. "Shut up!" he screamed loudly at me, his face quickly turning a deep, furious, ugly shade of crimson red. "Just shut your mouth right now, Charmaine. You have always arrogantly thought you were so much smarter and better than everyone else in my family. You have always looked down on me because you simply make a little more money. But you are still my legally wedded wife. You explicitly promised to submit to my leadership when we stood together at the church altar. I am the true man of this house, and I possess the absolute legal right to actively manage our financial assets however I see fit to properly secure our future." He reached wildly across the table, grabbing the signed paper. "I have the documents right here," he yelled. "This is a legally binding medical power of attorney. She is unstable. I authorize this sale." Mama Gloria did not shout. She stepped smoothly past me, towering over the table. She raised the thick black leather binder high and violently slammed it down onto the white tablecloth. The massive impact made everyone jump. She flipped it open, revealing the authentic trust documents. She snatched the fake power of attorney from his hand. "This document is absolutely fraudulent," she announced clearly. "Look closely at this specific notary stamp. It belongs to Thomas Vance, a man whose notary license was permanently revoked 3 years ago for real estate fraud. You intentionally utilized a revoked stamp to forge a federal legal document. Darnell, you are completely finished, and you are going directly to a federal prison cell right today." The words federal prison acted like a live electrical wire thrown directly into a pool of water. The older investor, the undercover agent Mama Gloria had told me about, maintained his stoic composure, simply sliding his silver pen into his breast pocket. But the second investor, a much younger, incredibly nervous man in a gray suit, completely lost his mind. He sprang up from the plush velvet chair so fast it tipped over backwards, crashing loudly onto the raised platform. He aggressively snatched his expensive leather briefcase from the floor, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the heavy handle. "I am absolutely not going down for this," the younger investor shouted, his voice cracking loudly in the silent restaurant. "I was explicitly told this was a clean, standard commercial acquisition. I have absolutely nothing to do with forged notary stamps or federal wire fraud. I am an established business owner with a pristine public reputation. I am leaving this restaurant right now before my entire career is completely destroyed by this pathetic scam." He practically lunged off the VIP platform, knocking a tray of expensive appetizers out of a waiter's hand, shoving past the frozen sommelier, and sprinting desperately toward the main entrance. He did not make it very far. Uncle Jerome smoothly shifted his massive frame, completely blocking the narrow aisle leading to the heavy wooden exit doors. The younger investor collided hard against my uncle's solid chest, bouncing off him like a fragile bird hitting a brick wall. "Move out of my way right now," the panicked man demanded, trying to aggressively push past. Uncle Jerome did not even flinch. He looked down at the trembling man with a cold, unyielding glare. "Nobody is leaving this dining room until the proper authorities arrive to fully secure the scene," Uncle Jerome stated, his deep voice carrying the absolute authority of a man who had successfully locked down hundreds of crime scenes. "You are currently an active participant in an ongoing federal sting operation. The exterior of this building is already heavily monitored. If you take one more step toward those exit doors, I will personally place you under citizen arrest for attempting to flee the scene of an active felony." The younger man stumbled backward, his face completely devoid of color, clutching his leather briefcase tightly against his chest, like a frightened child holding a security blanket. Darnell was breathing incredibly fast, his chest heaving aggressively under his expensive tailored suit. He looked frantically between Mama Gloria, Uncle Jerome, and the blocked exit, His eyes were wide, feral, and completely consumed by absolute panic. "You cannot do this to me!" Darnell gasped, pointing a violently shaking finger at my mother-in-law. "You are bluffing. You do not have the power to stop this transaction. I have to sell this building today. I absolutely have to close this deal right now." He was no longer trying to play the dominant husband or the savvy real estate mogul. He was openly begging. His voice held a raw, pathetic desperation that went far beyond the normal fear of facing legal consequences. It was the visceral, animalistic terror of a man fighting for his actual physical survival. I stared at him, feeling a sudden shift in the atmosphere. "Why are you so incredibly desperate, Darnell?" I asked, stepping much closer to him. "You already stole my entire life savings. You drained $80,000 from my checking account yesterday. That is more than enough cash to run away or hire a sleazy defense attorney. Why are you willing to risk a massive federal fraud charge just to push this specific building sale through today?" Mama Gloria let out a dark, knowing laugh that sent shivers directly down my spine. She looked at Darnell with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Tell her, Darnell," Mama Gloria commanded sharply. "Tell your wife exactly why $80,000 is merely a tiny drop in the bucket for you right now. Tell her about the massive, terrifying hole you dug for yourself while you were busy playing the big man around town." Darnell violently shook his head, pressing his back completely flat against the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. He refused to speak. His jaw was clamped shut, his eyes darting wildly around the room as if searching for a magical escape hatch. "Very well," Mama Gloria said smoothly. "I will gladly explain the situation to everyone." She turned to face me, her posture perfectly straight. "Your husband did not just try to sell your historic building to magically fund his flashy lifestyle. Darnell is a deeply insecure, profoundly weak man who constantly needed to buy the respect of his peers because he lacked any real substance of his own. He bought the expensive Italian suits, he leased the luxury sports car, and he actively funded his sister Shanice and her ridiculous designer shopping sprees to maintain the grand illusion of massive generational wealth. But his actual salary as a mediocre finance broker barely covered his own basic credit card minimums. He was drowning in massive, unmanageable debt long before your appendix ever ruptured. So he found an alternative source of income. Mama Gloria turned her piercing gaze back to Darnell. 6 months ago, Darnell quietly approached a very dangerous, highly illegal underground street lender operating quietly in the Southern District. He desperately asked them for a massive personal loan, $500,000 to be exact. He needed the cash to pay off his mounting gambling debts and keep the fake millionaire charade actively going. But violent street lenders do not just hand over $500,000 based on a friendly handshake. They demand hard, tangible collateral. Darnell proudly showed them the official property deed to your grandfather's commercial building. He legally promised them that if he did not repay the $500,000 plus exorbitant street interest by the end of this current month, they could simply seize the multi-million-dollar property as full payment. The brutal reality of his actions slammed into me with devastating force. He had not just stolen my money, he had recklessly placed my family legacy directly into the violent hands of organized criminals. And the absolute worst part was the timeline. Today was the very last Friday of the month. His massive illegal debt was officially due today. He needed the cash from this fraudulent restaurant sale not just to get rich, but to literally save his own life. Darnell began to physically slide down the glass window, his legs completely giving out underneath him. He hit the carpeted floor of the VIP platform, pulling his knees up tightly to his chest like a frightened toddler. He was openly sobbing now, massive tears streaming down his face, completely ruining his carefully styled image and staining his expensive silk tie. His entire body shook with violent tremors. "Please, Charmaine." He wept loudly, his voice echoing pathetically across the silent dining room. "You have to sign the transfer papers. You have to save me. If I do not walk out of this restaurant with the cash today, they are going to kill me. They promised me they would break both my legs and then aggressively kill me. You cannot just stand there and let them openly murder your husband. I looked down at the miserable weeping creature crouching on the floor. This was the man who had formally promised to protect me. He had happily left me alone in a sterile hospital room, bleeding and suffering, actively hoping I would be legally declared insane so he could steal my inheritance. He had laughed loudly with his sister while she greedily packed my personal belongings into brown cardboard boxes. He had shown me absolutely no mercy when he arrogantly believed he held all the power. And now he expected me to magically rescue him from the highly lethal consequences of his own massive greed. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no sadness, just a profound, liberating emptiness. I am not signing anything, I stated coldly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You made your bed, Darnell. Now you get to sleep in it. The undercover federal agent sitting at the table finally stood up, brushing a tiny piece of lint off his suit jacket. He reached inside his pocket and pulled out a sleek black radio transceiver. The sting operation is officially compromised by the unexpected arrival of the primary spouse. The agent spoke clearly into the device. Move all secondary units in right now, secure all exits, and immediately detain the primary target. We have a confirmed verbal admission of guilt regarding the forged power of attorney. The restaurant patrons began to deeply panic, finally realizing that the dramatic domestic dispute they were watching was actually an active police raid. People started grabbing their coats and anxiously pushing back their chairs. Uncle Jerome raised his hands loudly, instructing everyone to remain perfectly calm and quietly stay seated. But Darnell was not listening to the undercover agent or my uncle. His terrified, tear-filled eyes were completely fixated on the street outside. I followed his gaze, turning my head to look through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the busy downtown avenue. The bright afternoon sunlight illuminated the bustling street, but the specific scene unfolding directly outside the restaurant was chillingly dark. Two massive, heavily tinted black SUVs had just pulled aggressively up to the curb, completely ignoring the designated valet parking zones. They did not have flashing police lights. They did not have official government license plates. They were dark, menacing, and perfectly silent. The vehicles violently boxed in Darnell's leased luxury sports car, scraping loudly against its shiny paint and completely trapping it against the concrete sidewalk. The driver's side door of the lead SUV slowly opened. A massive, heavily tattooed man, wearing a dark leather jacket, stepped out onto the cobblestone driveway. He was physically terrifying, exuding an aura of pure, unchecked street violence. He did not rush toward the restaurant doors. He simply stood next to the vehicle, crossing his thick arms over his chest, and stared directly through the restaurant window. His cold, dead eyes locked directly onto Darnell, crouching on the floor. A second man stepped out of the trailing vehicle, casually holding a heavy metal baseball bat resting against his shoulder. They were not federal agents arriving to make a clean legal arrest. They were the underground street lenders. They had undoubtedly been tracking Darnell all afternoon, waiting patiently outside the restaurant to legally collect their $500,000 the exact moment he finished closing his massive real estate deal. And now, standing confidently on the sidewalk, they were actively watching his entire fraudulent scheme completely collapse. Darnell let out a horrifying, guttural scream of pure terror, pressing his wet face aggressively against the restaurant carpet. The monsters he had arrogantly invited into our lives were finally here to loudly collect their massive debt. Darnell scrambled backward, his Italian shoes slipping against the carpet. The scream died in his throat, replaced by gasps for air. He crawled directly toward me, completely abandoning his pride. He collapsed heavily at my feet, grabbing the hem of my trousers. He looked up with the wild eyes of an animal in a trap. "Charmaine, you have to sign the papers right now," he sobbed, his voice cracking. "Tell the investors the deal is valid. Authorize the sale. Please, baby, I am begging you. If I do not walk out with that cash today, those men are going to butcher me. They will drag me into an alley and end my life. You promised to love me through thick and thin. You took a vow before God. You cannot just let them murder your husband in cold blood." His audacity was breathtaking. Even while begging, he dared to weaponize our wedding vows. vows he desecrated when he left me to die. I looked down at his shaking hands clutching my leg and felt nothing but chilling disgust. I stood perfectly still, letting him degrade himself in front of the crowded dining room. The wealthy patron stared at Darnell with open contempt. The undercover federal agent remained standing calmly, speaking into his device to confirm backup units were moving into position. Darnell was oblivious to the dragnet closing around his neck. He was consumed by the terrifying threat outside the glass windows. When he realized his pleas were bouncing off my cold exterior, his panic morphed into an ugly betrayal. He shifted his tactics perfectly, demonstrating the lack of loyalty that ran deep within his toxic family. "It was not my fault," Darnell screamed hysterically, tears streaming down his face. "It was Shanice. The whole thing was her idea. She found the revoked notary stamp. She told me to let your insurance lapse so the hospital would declare you incapacitated. She said you treated our family like garbage because you made a higher salary and told me we deserved a piece of your grandfather's pie. She forced me to do it, Charmaine. She eagerly packed your bags today. She wanted your expensive designer jewelry. I was just trying to pay off my street debts, but Shanice is the real mastermind. Arrest her, not me. Please just sign the paper so I can pay these monsters." He was throwing his beloved sister directly under the wheels of a federal investigation to save his pathetic skin. This was the true nature of the family who constantly lectured me about blood loyalty. They were deeply loyal only when they were successfully feeding off my resources. The moment the tables turned, they instantly turned into ravenous wolves tearing each other apart to survive. I stared down at his weeping face, feeling the thread connecting me to this marriage snap completely. The intense physical pain from my surgical incisions remained, but the heavy emotional burden I carried for 5 years evaporated. I felt incredibly free. I slowly reached down and pried his trembling fingers off my trousers. I took one deliberate step backward, creating a permanent physical boundary between us. "I want a divorce," I stated clearly, my voice ringing out with absolute undeniable finality. "I want a divorce, Darnell, and I want my $400 back." The specific mention of the negative checking account balance hung in the air, a sharp reminder of the financial ruin he maliciously planned for me. Darnell stared up at me, his mouth hanging open in stunned silence. He finally understood there was absolutely no manipulation tactic left in his arsenal. At that exact moment, the heavy wooden doors of Le Petit Chateau violently burst open. Uncle Jerome stepped aside immediately, making way for the cavalry. 6 armed federal agents wearing dark tactical vests stamped with FBI stormed into the opulent dining room. They moved with terrifying speed, their heavy boots thudding loudly against the polished hardwood floors. The wealthy patrons instantly pressed back against the velvet booths, scrambling to get out of the way of the raid. The classical music was abruptly drowned out by the harsh shouts of federal law enforcement. "Federal agents, stay exactly where you are," the lead agent roared, scanning the room before locking his eyes entirely on the VIP platform. He pointed directly at the man kneeling on the floor. "Darnell Hayes, do not move a single muscle. Keep your hands where I can clearly see them." Darnell let out a pathetic whimper, throwing his hands into the air, as if surrendering to a firing squad. 2 massive agents rushed up the short carpeted steps, grabbed Darnell roughly by his expensive suit jacket, and hauled him violently to his feet. They aggressively spun him around, slamming him face first against the glass window. The loud thud echoed sharply. One agent kicked Darnell's legs apart, while the other violently twisted his arms firmly behind his back. The metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists sounded like the most beautiful symphony. "Darnell Hayes, you are officially under arrest for the explicit commission of severe federal crimes," the lead agent stated loudly, reading the charges so the entire room could witness his downfall. "You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, the intentional forgery of official government notary documents, and attempting to defraud a federally insured banking institution. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be aggressively used against you in a court of law." Darnell was crying so hard he was actively hyperventilating as the agents patted him down for weapons. He turned his head sideways against the glass, looking desperately at me. "Charmaine, please." He choked out, his voice muffled by the window. "Help me." I completely ignored his pathetic plea. I turned my back to him, looking instead at Mama Gloria. She stood tall and incredibly proud, her hands resting calmly on the thick legal binder. She offered me a satisfied nod of absolute approval. We had successfully executed the trap. The federal agents did not waste any time lingering in the restaurant. They grabbed Darnell by his arms and began marching him quickly toward the front exit. He stumbled over his own expensive shoes, his knees buckling with every single step, forcing the massive agents to practically carry his dead weight through the dining room. The patrons watched in stunned silence as the flashy finance broker was humiliatingly paraded through the establishment like a common street criminal. He openly sobbed the entire way, a messy, undignified display of pure cowardice. Uncle Jerome held the heavy wooden door open for the agents, a dark, satisfied smirk plastered securely across his hardened face. "Enjoy your extended stay in federal lockup, son," Uncle Jerome muttered quietly as Darnell was dragged roughly past him. But the absolute ultimate payoff occurred the very moment the federal agents pushed Darnell out through the doors and onto the bright cobblestone sidewalk. The two heavily tattooed underground street lenders were still standing completely still next to their dark SUVs. They had not run away when the FBI tactical raid team suddenly arrived. They knew the federal agents were entirely focused on the white-collar fraud occurring inside the building, not the shadowy street business standing on the public sidewalk. They stood their ground, crossing their thick arms, completely unbothered by the law enforcement presence. As Darnell was aggressively walked out of the luxury restaurant in bright silver handcuffs, he was forced to walk directly past the terrifying men he owed $500,000 to. The federal agents pushed him forward, but Darnell could not stop himself from looking over his shoulder at his violent creditors. The lead street lender, wearing the dark leather jacket, did not yell or make sudden aggressive movements. He simply looked Darnell directly in the terrified eyes, slowly raised his right hand, and offered a very chilling, deeply menacing wave goodbye. A cold smile spread slowly across the criminal's face. The loan shark was absolutely smiling at him. That single silent smile explicitly conveyed a terrifying, undeniable truth. Darnell was going to federal prison, but his massive debt would not disappear behind bars. The street inevitably collects its due. Darnell began to scream hysterically, thrashing wildly against the firm grip of the federal agents, absolutely begging them to put him safely into the back of their armored transport vehicle before the street lenders could reach him. The heavy doors slowly swung shut, cutting off the pathetic sound of his wailing voice. The silence that followed was profound. It was the sound of my life returning completely to my own control. 3 months have passed since that unforgettable afternoon inside Le Petit Chateau. My physical recovery took time, requiring several weeks of strict bed rest and a carefully managed diet to ensure my surgical incisions healed perfectly. But the emotional recovery was surprisingly swift. Once the toxic weight of Darnell and his deeply parasitic family was completely removed from my daily existence, I felt lighter than I had in over 5 years. The intense stress that used to knot my shoulders and keep me awake at night simply vanished. I returned to my position as creative director with a renewed sense of fierce focus and absolute clarity, closing 2 major corporate accounts within my first month back at the office. My corporate software company officially promoted me to senior executive partner after witnessing my unwavering professional resilience during the crisis. The commercial building of Grandfather Theodore remains safely under my legal control, currently undergoing a massive renovation project that will double its market value by next spring. The federal justice system, usually notoriously slow-moved, with absolute ruthless efficiency, when presented with the mountain of undeniable evidence Mama Gloria and the district attorney provided. Darnell is currently sitting in a federal detention center, awaiting his official sentencing hearing next week. His court-appointed public defender strongly advised him to accept a comprehensive plea deal, explicitly confirming he is facing a minimum of 10 solid years in federal prison for wire fraud forgery and attempting to defraud a federally insured banking institution. His massive debt to the underground street lenders remains completely unpaid. Consequently, he has been placed in protective custody within the prison system, living in constant agonizing fear of the inevitable moment he is transferred to the general inmate population. He occasionally tries to call my phone from the jail using his limited allotted minutes, desperately begging for legal assistance or money for the commissary. I blocked his incoming phone number on the very first day. His sister Shanice experienced her own swift, devastating downfall. Without Darnell constantly siphoning my hard-earned money to fund her extravagant lifestyle, her grand illusion of generational wealth collapsed instantly. She was formally evicted from her luxury apartment after missing 3 consecutive months of rent payments. When the eviction officers arrived to clear the property, they brought along a repossession agency that officially confiscated her heavily financed vehicle and every single designer handbag she falsely claimed to own. She currently lives entirely alone in a tiny cramped studio apartment on the far edge of the city. Uncle Jerome recently drove past a local fast food drive-through window and saw her wearing a greasy polyester uniform visor, handing out paper bags of French fries to impatient customers. She no longer posts glamorous videos on social media, celebrating her fake boss moves. Her digital presence has been entirely erased by the harsh, undeniable reality of her actual circumstances. I heard she frequently asks her former wealthy friends for small financial loans, but they immediately block her calls the moment they hear her desperate voice. Today, the dark shadow of my past marriage feels like a distant, faded nightmare, entirely eclipsed by the vibrant warmth of my present reality. I am currently sitting on the expansive wooden deck at the beautiful suburban home of Mama Gloria, completely surrounded by the loud, joyous sounds of a massive Sunday family cookout. The thick, sweet smell of hickory smoke and barbecue sauce fills the warm afternoon air. Uncle Jerome is standing very proudly by the massive stainless steel grill, loudly debating the upcoming football season with 3 of my older cousins, while expertly flipping thick slabs of seasoned ribs. My younger cousins are running wildly across the freshly cut green lawn, their bright laughter echoing happily through the neighborhood. Mama Gloria is sitting right beside me in a comfortable wicker chair, sipping a tall glass of iced sweet tea. She reaches over and gently pats my knee, offering me a warm, deeply genuine smile of absolute approval. Looking around this crowded backyard, watching these wonderful people share food, share stories, and share genuine love, I finally understand the true definition of family. For so long, I allowed Darnell and his sister to heavily manipulate me using the sacred concept of blood loyalty. They constantly weaponized the idea of marriage to aggressively extract my resources, demanding unconditional support, while offering absolutely nothing but cold betrayal in return. They believed family was a strict financial obligation, a legal title you could use to demand unearned respect and unlimited access. But they were completely wrong. I used to spend every single Sunday desperately trying to blindly impress my ungrateful in-laws with expensive catered meals, foolishly hoping they would finally accept me. Now I simply relax and let my family love me freely. Family is absolutely not just about sharing a last name on a piece of paper or signing a marriage certificate in a fancy church. True family is actively demonstrated by the people who consistently choose to show up for you when you are at your absolute lowest point. Family is the strong, unwavering presence sitting quietly in the uncomfortable vinyl chair next to your hospital bed when you are sick, bleeding, and have absolutely nothing of material value to offer them. Family is Uncle Jerome kicking down a wooden door to protect my home. Family is Mama Gloria mobilizing a federal sting operation simply because someone dared to hurt her grandchild. Family is ultimately the unbreakable circle of protection, respect, and genuine care that demands absolutely no financial compensation. I had to endure the worst betrayal of my life to finally recognize the incredible strength of the village that had always been standing right behind me. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic partner or family member to save your own life, I want to hear your story in the comments. Hit that subscribe button because the trash always takes itself out eventually. Stay strong, Queens.